Yeah. Oh, I'm super close.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, boss.
So are all these mics turned on? Everybody ready to go?
Is this okay for KOCO?
That's perfect.
Are we good? Okay. Well, thank you all for being here. First of all, I want to say that our thoughts and prayers are with those affected by the weather events that have been occurring in the state this week. There's more severe weather in the forecast, and I just implore everybody to be weather aware, to listen to authorities, and evacuate when prompted. We can work to replace belongings and repair homes, but you don't have that flexibility with regard to the lives of you and your families and loved ones. So I encourage, as we always do in the office, those in the beginning phases of recovery, please take time to make good decisions about who you're contracting with. Don't fall victim to door-to-door folks who want money up front and make promises that don't seem realistic. We have been deploying agents around the state to pass that information and make sure that folks are on notice about how to avoid contractor fraud. Our consumer protection page on the website also provides additional information to help people protect themselves. So, moving on as to why we're here today, it's my honor to welcome FCC Chairman Ajit Pai to Oklahoma for a stop on his digital opportunity tour. I understand this may be your first trip to Oklahoma, in your current role at least, but you're no stranger to the state, having grown up in Kansas. So he will tell you more about his trip momentarily, but we've had a very constructive meeting with the chairman, and Marissa Treat with Senator Langford's office joined that meeting, and so we were happy to spend some time discussing robocalls and how the state and the federal government can work together to deal with same. So scam phone calls and illegal robocalls have run rampant not only in the state but across the nation. It's estimated that there were nearly 48 billion robocalls made last year. The number is expected to increase this year. So with the number of calls that I receive alone, that number seems low to me, but nonetheless, they've really gotten out of hand. And as we've seen recently, the scams are becoming more advanced. Con artists have found ways to siphon money or steal personal information from folks who just answer the phone. And as much as we hate it, the best advice that we continue to provide people is if you don't know who's on the other end of a call, don't answer the phone. But the way it is now, we in the state have very little recourse with regard to holding those accountable who are making the calls. The intricate webs that these con artists use to make the calls make them extremely difficult to trace. So the fight is going to take both the federal government and the state government working together to do its best for all. And I applaud the chairman for his leadership in making this complex issue a top priority. And that's why and I know I speak for 4 million Oklahomans, welcomed the chairman's announcement last week that the proposed hold measures that would, among other things, empower service providers to block illegal robocalls by default before they even reach consumer phones. Giving service providers that authority is consonant with what 34 attorneys general and I have recommended just this past October, and I know I speak on behalf of my AG colleagues when I say thank you for responding in real time to that measure. We're also hoping Congress will take action on the TRACE Act, and I know you're working behind the scenes to promote that with folks in the House and Senate. And that would require service providers, the TRACE Act would require service providers to adopt technology that verifies that incoming calls are legitimate before they reach consumers' phones. and also allows the FCC to fine telemarketers up to $10,000 per prohibited call. So we're looking forward to Congress taking action on that measure. We are grateful for you being here today. I think it's important to maximize your time here, particularly with members of the press. So I'm going to cut my comments short. We're looking for you to comment to the extent you can on how you and the FCC are working with correctional facilities and folks there with regard to the phenomenon, I guess I'll call it, of contraband phones and the extent to which criminal activity is conducted by people who are actually in prison. We have our work cut out for us, but my commitment, Mr. Chairman, is that we're going to work with you hand in glove. Whatever you need from the state level here in Oklahoma, we're going to provide you. Thank you for making Oklahoma stop on your digital opportunity tour. And with that, I want to hand things off to you. Look forward to your comments. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you very much, Attorney General Hunter. I very much appreciate the chance to be here today. Before I begin, though, I do want to join General Hunter in expressing my thoughts and prayers to the Oklahomans who have been affected by the weather this week. When we were landing in Tulsa, we saw water pretty much everywhere where it shouldn't have been. And this afternoon, as a matter of fact, I had a chance to visit the Oklahoma City 911 Communications Center, where we heard firsthand how some of the great public safety communications officials here in the state of Oklahoma are working overtime to make sure that Oklahomans are safe. So we certainly join in General Hunter's recommendations for people as they navigate these treacherous waters and as they are on the road to recovery. Also wanted to say thank you to Attorney General Hunter and his terrific team for hosting us here today. We just had an excellent conversation about a whole variety of topics, and they have welcomed us here in the state of Oklahoma. Always grateful when Oklahomans open their doors to a wayward Kansan who just happens to stray into the state. And so, as I was saying to the General, I wore a Sooner Crimson as a peace offering to the folks here in Sooner State. But it's been a great trip here in Oklahoma over the past day or two. I had a chance to meet with, as he was mentioning, a Just Done Correctional Facility in Taft, some of the Oklahoma Department of Corrections officials who are struggling with this problem of contraband cell phones. So one of the corrections officials called it the great enabler for a lot of the bad activity that happens in prisons: threats to other inmates, threats to witnesses, threats to prosecutors, criminal scams. A lot of these things are happening using this device that many of us simply take for granted. The FCC is committed to working with state law enforcement and others to make sure that we stop this problem, and we're actively working on a number of different fronts to do that. Later on, had a chance to meet in Okmulgee with the East Central Electric Cooperative, which is looking to use $22 million in FCC funding through our recent Connect America Fund auction to deliver broadband, high-speed internet access to thousands of locations in rural Oklahoma, particularly on Creek Nation. These are parts of the state that are on the wrong side of the digital divide. For the first time, they are going to be getting high-speed internet access. And we're very excited to see what that means for the folks there and for the entire country going forward. This morning, we had a chance to visit in Ada with Chickasaw Nation, where we heard how they're interested in using the 2.5 gigahertz band, the so-called educational broadband service, to provide wireless services to folks in and around Ada who just simply don't have access to the internet right now at all. There are a lot of complex issues to sort out, but historically, this spectrum has been underused, and our goal is to make sure that we allow everybody, especially tribal members who don't have access, to finally get the benefit of that public resource. And then finally, as I mentioned, we had a chance to visit with General Hunter, talking about a lot of different issues. First and foremost, though, robocalls. I mean, all of us know it. Whenever I step into a room and say the word, a look gets on the faces of people that you're sick of this. And a lot of us have taken to just dismissing the utility of these smartphones altogether, because if you see a phone number that's not programmed into your phone already, you sometimes suspect, and often you're right, that it's coming from somebody who's just looking to harass, annoy you, or even scam you. And I want to salute the Attorney General and his team for taking this on as an issue. It's one of their top consumer protection priorities, and it is ours as well. It's our top category of complaints that we get at the FCC each and every year. And that's why over the last 2 years since I became chairman, we've been pulling out the stops to try to attack this problem. We've empowered phone companies to block calls that are obviously spoofed. That is, they use the area code that you might have. Maybe the next 3 digits are the same, but they could be a world away when they're actually placing that call. We set up a reassigned numbers database so that legitimate callers who are looking to reach their customers or patients and the like don't call somebody who has been reassigned that number and who doesn't want to receive those calls. We've empowered a lot of the phone companies to start exploring different technological solutions, and I in fact have demanded that they adopt caller ID authentication known as the shake and stir framework by the end of this year. And if they don't, I said the FCC will take regulatory action to ensure that they do. This would essentially be a digital fingerprint for every single phone call, and if the phone call didn't have that fingerprint, then the phone companies wouldn't be carrying those calls on their network. Additionally, the largest fines in the FCC's 85-year history have been imposed under my leadership over the past 2 years against robocallers. Almost $250 million we've imposed against folks who've been bombarding American consumers with these calls. But we aren't stopping there. As the Attorney General mentioned, in a couple of weeks on June 6th, we'll be voting on my latest proposal, which would be to make clear as a matter of law that phone companies are able to block calls that are obviously spoofed by default. So consumers wouldn't have to call up the phone company and opt into that call blocking service. It would be blocked from the get-go. Our goal is to make it somewhat like your email provider does. You might get spam messages, but your email provider uses advanced analytics and other filtering technologies to direct those into your spam folder, so you never even have to be bothered with them in your inbox. That's something similar that we want to see on the phone side, on the with respect to the phone system as well. So a lot of different initiatives, but time is not on the side of the American consumer, and that's why I'm so grateful to have the support and the time of the Attorney General and various other state law enforcement authorities. They have submitted a number of letters to us, including a letter that inspired our most recent proposal. So I want to thank you for doing that and for leading on a lot of these different issues. A lot of things in common that we have, a lot of challenges we have, but I think the potential is there as well for a very productive federal-state relationship. And so I just want to reiterate my gratitude to the Attorney General and his team for the hospitality they've shown and for the leadership they've exhibited on all these challenging issues.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How much time do we have for questions? Alex?
5-10 minutes.
Okay, we'd be happy to answer a few questions.
Chairman, with the rules that you're proposing that they're going to vote on, how big of a deal would that be? I mean, would that be something that we would see a significant amount of progress if phone companies were able to do that and to utilize that kind of thing?
I can't give you a numerical target, but what I can tell you is that currently call blocking services are not widely deployed. Very few consumers know that they're available. Very few consumers, even if they know that those services are available, are going to affirmatively call up the phone company to offer them. And as a result, many phone companies have not spent a lot of time developing those analytical tools to deploy them. But if they are allowed to do it by default, then they know, okay, if we deploy this broadly, we won't have to field a lot of complaints from our own customers about these robocalls. We can stop them at their source. So we actually think this could make a very significant dent in the problem.
Question?
I have unrelated question, but aside of robocalls, you are taking on pharma companies next week, and I just wanted to ask you, what are your hopes and expectations in regards to that trial?
Well, we intend to win the case. The multiple months of discovery, hundreds of depositions, millions of documents have convinced us even more that the proximate cause for the prescription opioid epidemic in our state are companies who marketed fraudulently the addictive qualities of the drug over 2 decades, in many cases knowing that there was a high probability that patients would become addicted, but focusing on, tragically, profits as opposed to people. So the case begins next Tuesday at 9 o'clock. Again, we're confident in our case, and we're confident in being successful in holding these companies accountable.
Chairman, on robocalls, there's so many people who are so frustrated, as you mentioned, by this. Whenever we interview people about robocalls, they say, well, why can't they just, this should just be illegal. Why can't people just be charged with scamming or whatever they're doing? Well, what are the challenges, and what else can be done moving down the line in your view?
There's several challenges. One is that the technology has progressed to the point that it's very easy, unfortunately, to unleash these robocalls. Now, essentially anyone in the world with an internet connection can place a lot of these calls to consumers, and there is a software available that allows them to mask the phone number they're really calling from the spoofed number, as it is known, to make it appear as if they're calling from your local area. Another problem is that a lot of these scammers lie beyond our borders, and so we don't have necessarily jurisdiction at the FCC or even as the entire U.S. government over some of those folks who are unleashing some of these calls. And so we have to work cooperatively with some of our foreign partners to share information when we see calls coming from a particular part of the country, and then encourage them to use their law enforcement tools to root out that problem. But that's a very difficult issue to solve. It's sort of like whack-a-mole, and that's one of the reasons why we're looking at the consumer side, the consumer-facing side, with call blocking and other types of initiatives to make sure that these calls are never placed at all. I do want to commend Congress, however, for taking steps along these lines to solve some of those problems. So the TRACE Act, which the Attorney General mentioned, which I understand is scheduled to pass the Senate this afternoon if it hasn't passed already, this would provide the FCC many additional tools in addition to increasing the fine for the robocalls that are placed. It would also extend the statute of limitations and take other steps that are necessary for our enforcement team at the FCC to go after some of the bad guys when we can catch them.
I just want to ask one other
Sure.
thing. On this topic, we talked to the Department of Corrections here in Oklahoma a couple weeks ago, and they called on the FCC and federal legislators to allow them to jam cell phone calls coming out of prisons. I know there's been a lot of debate over years on this. Where does that stand, and what does that debate look like right now in Washington, the FCC?
A great question. Last year, I hosted the first ever forum at the FCC where I got together the wireless industry, vendors, correctional officials, and others to try to sort through this issue. And one of the things that clearly came out of that was a great interest in working together on a variety of different technological solutions. I think from the corrections standpoint, they are indifferent to the particular technology that is used. They simply want to end this problem. And to the extent that the law permits the Department of Justice to deputize, essentially, state corrections facilities to use some of those technologies, that is something that is being explored. So the Department of Justice has authorized some limited trials on the East Coast, and that is something that we're working with some of our state partners to make them aware that this option is out there. But there's no question that a lot of these inmates are using this platform for nefarious purposes, and so we want to make sure we're working with federal and state law enforcement as quickly as possible and as aggressively as possible to address the threat.
I just want to point out, Oklahoma's DOC specifically asked for the ability to jam phone calls coming into or out of the jail. Are there any concerns, or why hasn't that moved forward? What are some of the concerns around that from the agency's perspective?
I think the
Specific technology.
Right. The primary one over the years has been legal complexity, that under a particular section of the Communications Act, it's very difficult to block a lot of these wireless signals. It just simply isn't allowed in most cases. One of the exceptions to that is, however, that the Department of Justice is allowed to deputize, as I mentioned, state correctional officials who want to use that in particular facilities. And so over the last year or two, we've seen some of those trials taking place, and our hope is that working cooperatively, we can figure out a whole variety of technological options for state corrections officials to use. And as I said, we've had a very good working relationship with Director Albaugh and his team. Had a great visit at Taft yesterday at Just Done. And I think they understand that we take this problem seriously, and we're committed to working with them and the Department of Justice and others to solve the problem.
What do you think, Alex? One more question?
Yeah, anybody have one?
Okay. Any other questions? Very good. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Hey,
Great to be
work.
with you.
And thank you all for coming.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
So we're never here in DC after this. We're never here in DC after this.
I noticed that. Well.